This is the Business Storytelling Show with Christoph Trapp. Named a top 20 storytelling podcast and a top 5% podcast globally, Christoph chats with thought leaders and experts to share tips and tricks that can help you tell your company's stories better to drive business results. Available wherever you listen to podcasts, live streamed on major social media channels, and part of the DB&A television network, available on most U.S. television sets and streaming on Roku and Amazon Fire. Here's Christoph with today's episode. Let's go.
Let's go, business storytellers. How's everyone doing? Fist bump. Let's get today's episode started. Now, we want to talk about leadership. And I do appreciate the Stewart Leadership Group for today's partnership on today's episode. And we want to talk about how do we become better leaders, results-driven leaders. And what's interesting when it comes to being results-driven to me is we just had that discussion not too long ago with Mark Babbitt about respect and results. So we're going to dive into that topic even further today with Daniel Stewart, who co-authored Lead Now. Just finished that a few weeks ago. Fantastic read. So much information in here to learn how to become a good leader. Everything from change management, time management, ego management. That's a very, very interesting topic to me. What does that mean? How do we do that? And, other topics. I mean, it's everything. I think it's the second edition already. If you are watching on Amazon, we have the book in the carousel. If you're watching anywhere else, you can just Google for it and find it. The Lead Now, a personal leadership guide, coaching guide for a results-driven leader. So what I want to know from Daniel is, what is a results-driven leader? Daniel, welcome to the show.
Hey, Christoph, pleasure to be with you. Thanks for having us. Yeah, and I love the intro because it's so much about leadership and how we show up. And oftentimes we look at great leadership as being able to accomplish two different kinds of results. One is the business results, and second are the people results. And too often we only think of the business side of things, the financial, the operational. But more and more we need to also think about the people side of it, the engagement, the dynamics on the team, the career management. How are we leveraging people's strengths? A great leader is able to manage and accomplish and focus on both of those key areas of results. And that's what our research has indicated. And that's what multiple decades of working with great leaders all over the country and all over the world have continued to prove. And that's what we're excited to talk today about, especially related to the second edition of our Lead Now book.
Now, when it comes to people management, that's always interesting, especially currently we got this the headlines are full of the great resignation or whatever, people, salaries are going up because, talent is out there and nobody's putting up with, let's call it crap anymore, I guess. Of course, that's an interesting debate too, right? Because just because people have high expectations of you doesn't mean it's a horrible work environment, right? I mean, at the end of the day, we're there to work. But we're also humans. So how do we mesh those two? How does a good leader mesh the people side of things and the business results side of things? And of course, how do you get business results if you don't have the right people anyways?
Yeah, it's a great question. And what we're finding, especially over the last 2 years with the pandemic and hybrid work and being able to look at more inclusive workspaces, what we're finding is that the professional and the personal lines are becoming more blurred. And a great leader needs to be able to understand, acknowledge, and respect the fact that it's not just come to work, do your job, and then leave. No, work is a part of life. Work is a part of who you are. And to be able to then respect and acknowledge that identity that we bring. You mentioned the great resignation, and so many folks seemingly are leaving because they are not recognized for who they are and what they can contribute, and an environment is not created in which they can bring their best self to work. And there's a great comment or topic around psychological safety, and that is so often what is needed for a leader to create a psychologically safe environment for a person to be able to bring their best self each day to work and feel good about it. Otherwise, they're going to start looking around at other options and say, hey, where can I feel appreciated at work as well as balance the rest of my life? Because work is a part of life. It's not just the only thing.
It's very true. And you know what? It's interesting to me. They have become more and more integrated, but to me, I think for the most part, it's been positive to work at home because, if I can't sleep at 4 a.m., guess what I do? I just go to work, and I work just a little bit earlier. That doesn't mean I'm still working at 5 p.m. But of course, it also depends on what your job is, quite frankly. Now, Ryan Berry, president of Zappy's, he mentioned this on Real Talk, the Customer Insights show. What you talked about is to create that environment, to where people can perform their best. How do leaders truly do that? How do leaders communicate? How do they get trusted? And you know what? Here's the reason why I throw those two together for your question, is because sometimes people do say one thing, but you believe another thing because it didn't come through in a believable way, right? Or every time a leader says, oh, well, think about it, that always means no. And I grew up in Germany, and we're right down the middle here, right? If we say we think about it, that means we're thinking about it. If we say no, that means no. But that's not always the case, how some people communicate.
Yeah, great points. And I'll go back to something you said at the beginning, which is the question around what do results mean? What does it look like? And what we consistently find is great leaders who are able to inspire and engage people are able to be really clear about what the results are and allow people the how for them to decide how to achieve those results a little bit more often. And that is one of the things that's really stretching leaders right now. Typically, a leader is really used to saying, this is what you need to do, this is how you need to do it, and go execute. But more in a hybrid environment, a virtual space, it tends to be more skewed to what are the results? And frankly, I'm going to trust and allow you to have the space to decide how to do it. And that might mean working at 4 a.m. if you need to, or at 2 o'clock for a few hours and then back and forth. And also how to collaborate with each other and to work with each other. But there's more space, more opportunity for each person to feel more autonomous and independent in which they decide how to achieve the results. But the leader needs to be very clear about what those results are. And the other thing I'll mention is the authenticity piece. You mentioned the great point around the confusion, perhaps, between what I might say versus what I might do. And whenever there is a potential conflict, as I'm looking at you and you say, I'm really excited about this new initiative. Okay, which one am I going to believe? Your words or the actions and how you look? I'm going to believe how you look and how you act. And so for a leader to remember that they are always on stage. The messages, they are sending messages all the time. And for them to reflect on their own intentions and to be able to reconcile those and speak authentically, they might not love the new idea, but how can they own it to work together to make things better? And again, to be clear in terms of results.
Very, very interesting. And so this is the face I have, right? Like this is it. This is my thinking face. This is my resting face. This is everything, And so we want to be careful, and we want to have that baseline too with people. You know what I mean? If they never smile, just because they don't smile while they're talking to you, that's still the baseline, right? So you got to figure out what people's reactions mean. How much does it come back to having a shared story? So I'm thinking about, like even a football team, they all have shared stories, right? They want to win together. They want to do certain things together. But how important is it to share what you're trying to accomplish and also the journey? For me, I'll give you an example really quickly. I was just researching some things on how to bring podcasts, even in the metaverse. And I enjoy the journey as much as I enjoy the end result, right? My story is so interesting, right? How do we do this? How do we do that? And how important is that for a team to have that shared story? And what role does a leader play in that?
Yeah, in fact, we often call it rebooting a team because
Mhm.
we're finding, especially with the pandemic aspects and so much upheaval and newness being introduced, we do so much work with executive teams and leaders that we've done a lot of work now with rebooting the expectations. Why? It's to ultimately create that common set of expectations, that common story, that common vision. Because at the end of the day, there needs to be something that we can all hold on to, that we can all grab a hold to. And whether that is to help people manage through conflict, or whether it's to simply help align people who want to genuinely work together, frankly, there needs to be some general alignment. One of the activities we will do with teams and with leaders is to identify what are the team rules that you want to abide by. And it's not just a list that's gathered from an article and here you go. No, they create it themselves. And we encourage all leaders within their own respective teams to be able to have a very open, candid conversation around what are the team rules or the team operating behaviors. And that inevitably is also able to inform what that vision is. What are those results that you're wanting to work together to achieve? But again, I will emphasize it's not the leader coming in and saying, this is what we're going to do, follow me. That can sometimes be needed, but more and more, that is not the approach that people are expecting. It's more so, hey, I'm assigned as the leader. We're in this together. Let's all partner and identify what we can count on from each other and where we're trying to go so we can hold ourselves accountable as we go through that process. So it really comes down to rebooting. We often will use that term to build those common expectations, to get a sense of grounding, something to hold on to together. Otherwise, it's just dang hard to keep moving forward.
Assigned as the leader, that's an interesting way to put that. Now, I know you talk about inspiring commitment in your book, and let's talk about that a little bit. But I always have a little bit of a, I don't know, a knee-jerk reaction, we'll call it that, to when people say, oh, this leader, he's so great at motivating you. And I'm thinking, why aren't you motivated yourself? Like, I am motivated of doing what I'm doing, right? As long as I'm in the right role, as long as I'm in the right thing. There's been days in my career, Daniel, where people try to get me to become a salesperson. I'm not a salesperson. I'm a content strategy guy. That doesn't mean I can't sell content strategy as a consultant, but not as a true salesperson. Very, very big difference, right? So, where's that line between inspiring commitment, and what does that mean, and just having people who are inspired or motivated, I guess, motivated on their own?
Yeah, it really comes down to a basic assumption that sometimes we get a little wrong. And that assumption is that we think our job as leaders is to motivate other people and to get them to do things. We like to switch that and kind of flip it on its head. The main objective of a leader is to create an environment where people can motivate themselves, an environment that is inspiring for themselves to be able to then voluntarily come with a sense of motivation and a desire. And that really stems more into, or it's driven more by the relationship-oriented approach. With all of the artificial intelligence and robotic information out there, the one thing that it will never be able to do is cultivate deep relationships of trust with each other. And that ultimately is what a leader needs to do to be able to create the environment where people want to be inspired. They want to be committed. How can a leader paint the picture of what the future might look like? And not just alone, but with others. So there's more buy-in, there's more participation. And again, building that relationship and knowing people enough to leverage the strengths and the goodness that they bring. What drives them? What motivates them? And that doesn't mean that everybody has to love every moment of every day. No, there's going to be hard times, there's going to be challenges, but that's the cool thing when we're overall motivated to accomplishing something bigger than what we ourselves can just do on our own. So it's ultimately back to that leader creating an environment where people can be inspired. And that's the ultimate struggle for a leader, to be able to create that environment.
So I'm always a big believer in, what do people want to do? What are they good at? How do they like to work? And I think it's very interesting because early in my career, especially, like my second managerial job, I guess that sounds really weird, but the second job as a manager, you have to understand how people work. And I'm kind of like, let's go. Should Daniel come on the show? Let me see. Yep, he would be a good guest. Come on the show. Like, I don't have to think about it one way or the other for 3 days. But some people, they like to sleep on it, right? Some people, they like to mull it over, or they like to have a meeting or whatever. And that's fine, as long as you realize that's how people work. Sometimes the challenge is to figure out how they work, and people have to be honest about it. But how do we figure that out? We can't just guess, or can we? When I see there's all kinds of models, right? Like the disc model or whatever. Like, how do I know unless people tell me?
Yeah. And that's something else. We want to prevent the guessing and the assuming. We want to go straight and ask and talk and have open dialogue. One of the activities that we will recommend to any leader is for them to assess the 4 critical relationships that they need to have to be successful. And these 4 critical relationships, first is with your boss. Second is with your team or direct reports. The third is with your peers. And the fourth is with your customers. And one of the keys for a leader is to be able to understand what is unique about each of those 4 critical relationships, and to treat each relationship differently. One of the traps actually leaders fall into is treating all of those relationships the same. For example, they might think that each of those relationships value the money aspect. So they might come out and say, hey, we're going to save $500,000 if we do this. Well, actually, our research shows that the boss connects well with that, but your team does not. The peers do not. The customers do not. So for the leader, they need to be able to understand and respect, and yes, spend time and ask questions and understand what each of those relationships truly value, and then communicate in a way that fits for them. So the other example I'll share is direct reports are your team. Sure, it might be nice to be on budget and to hit your numbers, but you don't start with that. Instead, you start about how this change or this effort is going to help challenge and develop their skills and build their careers, or it's going to help unite them as a team, or it's going to help them build a sense of engagement and the dynamics within their working environment. Those are the things that they care most about typically, and you want to start with that sort of stuff, and then it grabs the heart more. So again, specializing and personalizing the message for each of these relationships is so key, and not treating them all the same.
Of course, we always want to know about our audience. That's a topic we talk about constantly on here. Now, let's talk about, how does dependability play in, and what does that even mean? I think I was just riffing on this the other day, but somebody was posting on LinkedIn how the boss is always moving the meetings, and then one time he or she, I don't remember the gender, didn't show up, and they moved it again, and then they moved it again, and they were so ready to talk about important things. People who have a lot of meetings, and they have to move things all the time for whatever reason, or stuff happens, right? Be picked up from the school because she fell on the playground. Not that we go to playgrounds right now in Iowa because it's like minus 20 degrees, but do you know what I mean? So how does dependability, how does that work, and what's the role of the leader and the team to make sure we're seen as dependable?
Yeah, dependability really is coupled so closely with what you prioritize. What is important to you? And one of the great questions that leaders can ask themselves is, what are the messages that I want to share with the habits that I'm going to showcase? What are the things that I'm going to show that this is important to me? And so one of the things is, if you want to show to your team that you value their development and you are there to support them, then you do not regularly move your one-on-one meetings, and you come prepared and you have staff meetings and you follow up with them. That sends powerful messages. When you start shifting around meetings and you start changing up things, it sends a message to all of those 4 critical relationships that they don't know what to count on from you. And so that then connects to dependability. There's a great story. Earlier in my career, I actually worked for a large airline, JetBlue Airways, actually, I'll say it, proud to have worked for them. One of the things that impressed me the most was their orientation approach, actually. Every 2 weeks, all of the senior leaders would fly down to Orlando, and they would all be there to welcome all of the new crew members. That was a behavior and a habit that they did not miss. And it sent a powerful message that they cared about the culture and how people were brought on. I share that so that leaders can ask themselves, it may not be orientation, but what are those key behaviors that are most important to you to send the messages to the key relationships that you work with, to be able to then say, yeah, this is what you can depend upon from me, because this is what I value as well. Powerful stuff to reflect and say, this is what's important to me, and remain consistent around that.
So interesting. Don't move meetings. Now, so my question, so first of all, a couple of thoughts on that. I mean, you can have meetings at times where you're less likely to be interrupted, right? I mean, I know what days I can do certain things and I will likely not be interrupted. Or do you know what I mean? Like I know when those days and times are.
Sure.
But as a leader, sometimes you have to prioritize, right? So if you have, so I'll give you this example. I have a team meeting, let's say 10 o'clock, and now all of a sudden I have to talk to a potential client or, or a client at 10 o'clock, a big account, whatever. So it's urgent. And I know, let's not talk about how everything always is urgent, but let's say it's urgent. How do you not move the team meeting? Like, how do you not prioritize it that way? What's your advice to the people that will die on that hill?
Yeah. And so 2 things. One is managing which battle you want to then move forward on versus focusing on the longer term. And it all comes down to, frankly, how do you have ongoing communication with your team? How have you been able to set priorities and communicate with them? And you can easily say, hey, I value this weekly meeting, for example. Now, this client situation has come up. Let me tell you about this. How do we then work through this? Or this is the decision I'm making and the why behind it. So people can kind of peek into your own decision-making process. The more people are aware of the background and the intention, the more grace, the more understanding they can then give, especially when you're consistent in following through and communicating. What gets people into trouble is when they start forgetting that level of communication, the follow-up and the heads up. And let me explain a little bit more why I made this decision and the intent behind it. That's where people start really getting into trouble, because they might just have quick little texts or that is not sufficient to be able to build and maintain a healthy level of trust. You need to be able to have deeper conversation and to open up a little bit more about the whys that lead to your decision. The moving a meeting or 2, that may be needed. That's not so much the point, because that's the ultimate action. We want to dive deeper into what's the intent and how do you communicate and open up about yours and others' intent. And that's where that true relationship can really be built.
I think intent is always an interesting thing, and I'm a big fan of explaining what your intent is and was, and that's why it's important to share your strategy. And quite frankly, now in the last 90 seconds here or so, Daniel, I know we teased it early on when we started the show. Ego management. Tell me about that. How does that apply here? When is it ego? When is it just, this is how we're going to do it? Talk about that a little bit.
Absolutely. Ego management is one of those concepts that is kind of on a scale. On the one side of the scale, you could be the jerk. You could be the one who takes credit for everything. You're the smartest person in the room, and everything needs to go through you. Then on the other side, it's when you don't even feel like you have your own voice, where you're so passive. You don't feel and believe that as a leader, you have something to share. There's some value you can add. It's finding that middle ground, be able to have enough confidence to be able to have that voice, while also having the confidence and the humility to listen to other voices, and not needing that your name ends up all over the headlines at the end of the day. It's balancing these things, level of learning and humility. And frankly, that really sums up a lot of what we are advocating day in, day out as we work with clients and coaching and leading to help them be more successful.
It's kind of interesting anyways. I think as a leader, you should hardly ever take the public credit anyways, and just, always give credit to the team, because at the end of the day, it is a team sport. And, many ideas come from different places, right? One teammate says one thing, another says another, and you might be the one who puts them all together, but, you wouldn't have gotten there without the team's help. Lead Now, it's available, second edition. Check it out. Daniel, thanks for joining us today. Really appreciate you making the time.
Thanks, Christoph. Take care.
That's a wrap. Thanks for tuning in. Please rate and review our show on your favorite podcast channels. And don't forget to share this episode with your networks. We appreciate you. Until next time, let the best stories win.